Afternoon. So we're going to start with this session of the second Interreligious Forum of the Americas, organized by Georgetown University, as well as the G20 Interfaith Forum, as well as International Center of Religious Studies of the BYU, the Interreligious Council of Southern California, and Religions for Peace. In these parallel sessions that we are carrying out right now, this particularly is about a topic that I imagine that we all are very interested in, and it has to do with the interreligious cooperation to stabilize fragile democracies. This is a topic that is very complex in our continent, and it starts from that fact that historically democracy is fragile, and so leadership, religious leaders can really have a very important role in social structures so that we can try to avoid chaos in the same societies. And at the same time, they can also help avoid or face challenges, conflicts to restore peace, and also to try to find ways so that we can reestablish stability. Our session is based on 3 questions that our panelists received, and these are going to be at the core of our discussion. Each one of the panelists will have 10 minutes to give their presentation. Afterwards, we're going to have an exchange dynamic among the panelists or with the audience as well. And let's please remember that the things that we are discussing here have as a goal to be part of a declaration that would be issued at the end of these encounters. So it is also important for you to take that into account. Just an announcement that I forgot to give at the beginning for all of you that need to have your COVID test before you finish attending this forum, please go with Bryden, who is back there, so that you can let him know that you need to take that test and for you to be able to do it easily. And also, I would like to thank those of you, either right now or at some other time, that are following us on the social media and those that are in this session. So the 3 questions around this session are: what do we understand by the notion of fragile democracies? And what are the signals, the dangers of that such fragility? Then the second one is, what are some ways in which interreligious cooperation can help to improve the risks of this fragility? And also, what type of interreligious cooperation could be the most appropriate to have a better chance at facing these sources of the lack of stability? We have Father Jorge Siglastra. He couldn't come here because his flight didn't arrive, so we are not going to have him. So sorry for that, but we are also going to have a little longer to discuss. And afterwards, we're going to give you the floor in the same order as it appears in the agenda. Each one of the panelists know that they can give the presentation in whatever language they feel more comfortable, because we also have translation services for this session. So to my left, I have Reverend Jose Piñero. He is Deputy Secretary of the Latino Evangelical Alliance. Then we have he is a leader who is committed nationally and internationally. He has served communities since his adolescence. He has participated in different forums, trainings, taking that message of hope in over 50 countries, mobilizing churches and fulfilling their calling. He was born in Venezuela, I understand. He is married. He has children and grandchildren, and he also lives in Venezuela. So we would like to give you the floor, Doctor, and we will be paying attention to whatever you want to say. Thank you. Good afternoon. First of all, I would like to thank to the organizers of these forum and those that make possible for us to have this type of encounters, to all of the other religious leaders and other members of the society that are raising their voice in favor of peace and common good. You have a very important role to bring hope in our days. Thank you so much for the work that you do, and blessings to all of you. We have understood this moral imperative of supporting solidarity with immigrants, with children and the most vulnerable people, and to promote this religious collaboration to transform our societies, bringing with that justice. Religion, among other things, is fundamental so that we can build the way in which we want to live, and how we can generate the social healthy visions and the ideal ways of living in peace. So many of us find in religion and in beliefs ways that we can build what we have in common, and it is because of this understanding from faith that we are aware of the contributions that we are making. The nations that have to do with totalitarianism have absolutist narratives that promote having conflict between sectors. In the face of that issue, the religion can be a common language in the face of divinity and can offer a countered narrative which is healthy and promotes peace. The biased presentation has a lot of prejudices that from other spaces has been done about religion as if it was strictly associated to absolute perceptions of truth. So we reach that conclusion that democracy is associated with everything that is contrary. But when we examine the notions of love, freedom, solidarity, respect, and other values highlighted by our faith, we can understand that the religious agenda has a lot to say and a lot to contribute to society and to the strengthening of democracy. Also participating in forums like this one that are a testimony of how we can have a good relation among differences and even disagreements, and how we can generate cooperations from different identities. Those that think that it is an utopia to have that religious vision of the common good forget that those utopias are the ones that have also taken us through different times of history. However, facts can prove how religion can help. So we are highlighting the importance of understanding and promoting that commitment between religion and democracy. And the thing is, religion, spirituality, beliefs are part of the natural habitat of the social dynamics and of the construction of our identities and social behaviors. Having said this, we would not really start evaluating democracy in the society without saying that, at least in the communities of faith that I represent, this is also another agenda that happens simultaneously to evaluate that democracy inside our doors. This is part of the teachings of Jesus, that is asking me to pay attention to my situations instead of paying attention to others. And that can also lead us to examine what we're doing in favor of women, children, migrants, or those that are more vulnerable. And democracy, just as social injustices, will always be fragile, and something that we have to do is to model from within, and that can really be going from the inside out to the public life. On the other hand, I understand that need to make a distinguish between extinct democracies and fragile democracies. The first, those that were robust democracies, but now we only see the form but not the content. Because one thing would be an imperfect democracy, and a very different one would be the tolerance to practices that deny the democratic principles or the initiatives that systematically stop allowing the state or the rule of law to exist, and they empty the content, that right to voting with fair, just votations or votings, or with impartial situations, such as, for example, the free development of their individual project of the citizens, the state, and some other democracy or democratic principles. A fragile democracy is even if fragile, still a democracy. So the possibility of having an alternation in charge can still be present. There is still a separation of the different branches, whether it's the legislative, the judicial branch, and in some others, even the elections branch. A fragile democracy would be still the democracy, even if it's threatened. And that threat is poverty, the lack of education that could make the citizens to become the victim of these populism. And these fragile democracies can be growing without a control. And in that sense, our democracies can vary from the ones that really require a lot of attention to the ones that are very robust. But the political crisis at the end still affect most people with poverty and also a scarcity of all types of goods. In Venezuela, we have managed to establish a social interreligious forum or some other initiatives that can really include the work of churches or organizations that are faith-based, this with the intention to have that diversity among them, the Catholic Church, Evangelic Church, the Reformed Church, also the Jew community, among others. And so that has helped, along with the government that promote dialogue, that we can come close and have a dialogue with the polarized political factors, whether they control the state or that they have international recognition. From the religious sphere, we have also talked to the academia. We have had different experts, virologists, physicians, pharmaceutics, so that we can also give it a response to COVID-19. And we have also advocated in favor of the humanitarian system in Venezuela. Right now, we're doing this in the face of some projects of law that could really affect NGOs in the country. And also, we see that sometimes the international cooperation can be made absolute, depending on different ways of thinking. So we use this in the same way that we can build that delivery and that a possibility to have that dialogue with those of us who are different. And by doing this, we can go deeper in our own democratization process. And also we offer a voice in the public space that could result each time more powerful, and that can also be understood that is not subordinated to alternative interests. Our cooperation is contributing to the development of better democratic relations and new ways of creating a community. We are giving a testimony that gives hope for a better human dynamic. And so with that, we are working towards a world that each time closes more and more to the values of freedom. So understanding the plurality that we have in the religious world offers a different logic to relations from the confrontation of the differences. We are not here to try to evaluate who is right or who is wrong, but instead, we are trying to foster our cooperation in the public space, the demands of our society, the questions of what do we do with poverty? What do we do with immigrants, with children, with the environment, with the different challenges that violence can arise, and also some other issues such as who we are and what do we do. From the religious communities, we also are providing some platforms that are facilitating solidarity, to have action that can be solidarity. And also we can give a response in favor of those that are vulnerable, among many other activities. And that is the scenario of the robust democracies that have that calling for the freedom of religion, plurality, and also respecting as well as other values of the ideal scenario, so that we can provide a better service to contribute to peace, and so that we can have a citizenship that is resilient. Thank you so much, and blessings to all of you.
Thank you very much, Pastor, and perfect compliance with time. Now we have Pastor Clement Joseph, Secretary General of Religions for Peace in Haiti. He's also the Secretary General of the Social Mission of Haitian Churches. and it's a network of evangelical organizations that work in Haiti to contribute to strengthening social and economic ties, and also to contribute to the people of Haiti. Pastor Joseph has a Master in Arts and Theology and a Bachelor of Law. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this invitation. Different participating in this forum. I am really happy to greet you on behalf of the Interreligious platform, Religions for Peace, Haiti. The theme that brings us together this afternoon is of great importance for Haiti, because the march toward democracy has been underway in Haiti for about 36 years now. However, to this day, democracy is still struggling to be accepted as a political and social paradigm in this country. This eloquently indicates the level of fragility to which democracy is exposed in the Haitian context. Among the many sources of weakness that affect the democratic process in Haiti, I would like to draw your attention to one of the biggest, which is the extreme poverty of the Haitian populations. If you visit Haiti today, you will see a population dominated for a very long time, who are surviving a terrible misery, but who still retain a little courage and hope. For more than 30 years, the Haitian people have been fighting to establish a democratic state that will be led by a government team that will provide them with basic services and guarantee them a minimum of well-being and dignity. But this is not the situation in Haiti today. The Haitian people is living a situation where about 50% of 11 million persons is living with severe food insecurity. Most of the population is living in extreme poverty. This situation forces young people, families with children, to work from Chile to Texas, looking for dignity, well-being that they don't find in their country. Crossing our continent from south to north, you will agree with me that this is a continental scandal. Sincerely, I think that as religious leaders, we need to consider this unacceptable on our continent. I think that we need to see how we can sensitize, we can motivate political conscience with our religious conscience to see how we can end this scandalous situation in Haiti. After the earthquake, the big earthquake in 2010, and with the creation of the Interreligious platform, Religions for Peace Haiti, religious leaders began to work together on terms of common interest, such as human rights, the fight against violence against women and girls, the process of dialogue and peace between political leaders or between political powers, the protection of the environment, and the fight against poverty in general. These interreligious actions encourage the population and strengthen their hope for a better future. However, despite all these efforts, Haiti is what it is today, while we have some opportunities in this country. We have some opportunities. For example, the land of Haiti can produce anything. And if in the community of business international, some company need to produce biological agricultural, Haiti is a land appropriate to that. We have also a population with majority, the most young people, very smart youth. And we have a population, a peaceful population with most hard workers. In my senior time today, I never heard Haitian pose a bomb or hijack a plane. We are a peaceful population. But we are in this situation and we need to end this unacceptable situation in Haiti. There are another opportunity. I consider that as an opportunity. Haiti is, according to my acknowledge, Haiti is the only one country in this region where there are a group of powerful countries as United States, Canada, France, Brazil, and United Nations, Germany. They say they are a group of friends of Haiti. We can consider that as an opportunity to encourage them to make this friendship effective, because it's not effective. They support a little bit, but the support is not enough. It's not sufficient. It's not effective. It's very important to encourage those countries to do more in Haiti and to do better in Haiti. If for this, another opportunity is you, religious leaders. I would encourage you to help us in Haiti to make consistent advocacy, to encourage this country to help the country, to help Haiti. Because this country, they show to the world that they have capacity to help. If you consider, for example, what they are doing to support Ukraine in this difficult context the Ukrainians are living, they show that they can. In Haiti also, they can do something as friends, as neighbors, because we are on the same continent. I imagine that this country, if they spend about 10% of what they are spending in Ukraine, in the country, if they prevent from investment of the funds, we can have a situation in in 2 and 3 years, you can see some differences in Haiti. So I am asking you, please, first to consider this situation unacceptable because it's scandalous. 2, to consider that Haiti has some opportunities. We can build on the opportunities. And finally, to work with us together, with our interreligious and religious conscience, to do something different. I would like to terminate my intervention to draw the attention of the Christian, as I am evangelical pastor, to the Christian specifically, that this country, Haiti, we are 87% of Christian. The last report of State Department on Religious Freedom for the year 2021 say clearly that in Haiti there are 52% of Protestant 35% of Catholic, and there are other types of Christian in this country. We can consider that at least there are 87%. We need the solidarity of all religious leaders, but specifically all the Christian. With this solidarity, we can make a difference in Haiti. This is my request to you, and I hope that together, if you leave us alone, we can't do anything. But if you support us, together we can make a difference by encouraging these powerful countries, friends of Haiti, to be effective by doing more and by doing better in the country. Thank you very much.
Gracias, Pastor. She is American, as we know, those of us who are from another region. She is the Membership and Operations Coordinator of the Network for Religious and Traditional Peacemakers. Rachel was graduated from UNITEC, where she also had a master in political science. And just in case, she actually speaks different languages, so we will be surprised because, of course, she is native in English, but she speaks Spanish, Arabic, and German. She also had been collaborating as a volunteer in coordinating programs and facilitating the education fund for the youth who are refugees and immigrants. And she has also worked as a volunteer to contribute to the refugee community in her state in Virginia for the last 5 years. So she has all of those experience that, of course, she will be able to use so that we can listen to her now. Thank you very much, Rachel. Thank you so much for the presentation. I'm going to switch into English since all of you can understand.
So thank you all so much for allowing me this opportunity to share some of my experiences and some experiences of the Network for Religious and Traditional Peacemakers. I'm happy to be here on behalf of our Executive Director, Dr. Mohammed El-Sanusi. And I want to thank the organizers and my fellow panelists for the opportunity to have this conversation. So the Network for Religious and Traditional Peacemakers brings together over 100 religious and traditional actors, institutions, as well as international NGOs, local nonprofits, multilateral institutions, and several governmental entities, all with the shared goal of positively engaging religious and traditional actors in peacebuilding and peacebuilding processes. As membership coordinator, I have the unique privilege of learning about each of our members' efforts to foster peaceful and inclusive societies in their respective local contexts. Today, I'd like to share a few of examples of the kinds of interreligious efforts our members are leading, which I believe have tremendous potential to not just stabilize fragile democracies, but to create the foundations necessary for more healthy democracies. But what does a healthy democracy look like? Today, we're discussing some of the signs of a fragile democracy, but we should also be discussing the inverse. What are the signs of a healthy democracy? So that we can have a common vision, a common goal that as diverse faith communities can work together towards achieving. One of the fundamental elements of a strong democratic system is a robust civil society, characterized by high levels of civic engagement, voter participation, and a healthy trust in democratic structures among the people. Another fundamental element is the respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms, including freedom of religion, belief, opinion, and expression. Democracy depends on our ability to work across our many dimensions of difference to achieve the common good. A true democratic system does not just tolerate this diversity, but values diversity as its very strength. Finally, a healthy democracy is not possible without transparency, accountability, equality, and access to justice for all. The potential impact of interreligious collaboration to foster these essential elements of a healthy democracy is twofold. On one hand, interfaith coalitions can form a powerful collective voice to hold local and national elected officials accountable for ensuring basic human rights, fundamental freedoms, and justice for all, especially for marginalized groups such as religious or racial minorities, women, and the LGBTQ community. Given their unique connections to their local communities, faith actors and institutions have an intimate awareness of whose voices repeatedly go unheard, and they can play a role in amplifying the voices of the marginalized and removing various barriers to participation. For example, in the United States, just this last year, over 800 faith leaders signed a letter to the Biden administration calling for the urgent prioritization of voting rights. And at the local level here in the United States, interfaith coalitions have come together to help their communities and congregations register to vote so that everyone's voices may be heard. Alongside these collective advocacy efforts, interreligious encounters in and of themselves can help foster the values and virtues needed for a healthy democracy, such as the celebration of diversity, concern for the common good, empathy, and humility. Through interreligious encounter and dialogue, we learn how to live and work together better, not despite our differences, but thanks to them. Allow me to share just a few examples of initiatives our members are leading to foster interreligious collaboration and therefore lay the foundations for a healthy democracy. In Lebanon, our member, the IDEAN Foundation, is carrying out the Al-Wan program, which aims to foster inclusive and active citizenship by bringing together youth of diverse faiths to carry out various community service projects. In Singapore, our member, the Roses for Peace, hosts annual youth forums and interfaith conferences, which provide a platform for youth of different faiths to gather regularly, share views, and deepen their trust and understanding among themselves. And here in the United States, the Tannenbaum Foundation promotes justice and builds respect for religious difference through various programs in schools, hospitals, and workplaces. I believe that in the long term, the positive impact of interreligious collaboration towards strengthening democratic structures is greatest when it starts at the grassroots level and is inclusive of all members of society, including women and youth. Before I conclude, I want to give one example of this kind of hyper-localized grassroots effort from my own personal experience. In 2016, the United States went from being classified as a full democracy to a flawed democracy, according to the Economist's Annual Democracy Index, due to extremely low levels of trust in institutions and high levels of societal polarization. At the time, I was a student in a small town in Southwest Virginia, and in the weeks that followed the election, I began to notice just how segregated our student body was, divided among like-minded groups of similar religious and cultural backgrounds. Along with a few student leaders of various faiths and cultural groups on campus, we decided to create a space in which students might feel safe having healing conversations across these differences. So we formed a student-led initiative called One Less Stranger. In the year that followed, we hosted various interfaith and intercultural dinners, which gathered strangers among the community to share meals and to share conversation, all with the goal of fostering understanding, empathy, and a few new friendships. Later, I would learn that a group of students who met at one of these dinners discovered a common interest in ice cream, of all things, and decided to meet weekly to continue the conversation that they started at one of these dinners at one of their favorite local ice cream shops. So I know that many of us here today are either involved in or are leading efforts to foster interreligious collaboration, and at times it can be difficult to see the impact, the immediate impact of such interreligious efforts. But I truly believe that it is these grassroots efforts that can foster, again, the virtues and values needed for a healthy democracy, especially when they are inclusive and inclusive of youth who can create the next generation of more peaceful and inclusive societies. And at the network, we do all we can to support such grassroots efforts that bring together people of diverse faith groups to build more peaceful and inclusive societies, to understand each other, to live together across their differences, and to ultimately learn to live together despite their differences and thanks to their differences. Thank you.
Presentation. I don't know if there are some questions from the audience, or I could probably start making some questions myself. The first that I could say after these exchange. Is that it is always very inspiring, and it really is hopeful as well to hear from people that are so committed in different initiatives that go beyond their own beliefs. So we're talking about the immediate social contribution, and it's not for their fellow members of their communities, but for others as well. And so I think that on the one hand, that is very inspiring. And I think as well that maybe a sign of fragility within our region to consider that help, or a lot more than help, but the fact that we are sharing life with people that are at a more vulnerable situation, usually that is identified only as another organization of the civil society, a little like Catherine Marshall was mentioning in the morning. And organizations that are faith-based or religious organizations seem to have a different point or perspective for civil versus civil organizations. And so whenever this is reflected also in social or political instabilities, sometimes we lose perspective of the contribution that is so specific of these institutions that are faith-based. And also because, at least I don't know about in other countries, but at least in Chile, and I would even say that at least in the South area of the continent, we don't even really have clarity about what those organizations are or what they do. Today, we were talking at different times that during the pandemic, the religious organizations were there. They helped with vaccination centers, distributing food. They did them probably differently to other organizations from the civil society, but what was characteristic from them? Why is it also important to have maybe a map, not just for the civil society, but also for faith-based organizations, so that we can really consider that we are having a distinction from other people's work? And Pastor here was saying that usually that is different to other type of organizations. I believe that's what I understood, that we're doing this openly, regardless of who is on the other side and without a political interest. So that is one thing. Are there some other things that could also imply a characteristic of or faith-based organizations? I would like to hear what you have to say according to that, because maybe as well, just as Catherine was mentioning in the morning, we could then go from intention to action, just as Pastor Clement Joseph was requesting in terms of Haiti. So probably we would also need to think about the identity of the organizations that are in this collaboration, and probably this is a more technical aspect, but I would like to dig deeper about what is that identity of these organizations. I don't know if maybe you would like to start commenting in the same order or in a different one. You could interrupt or as you wish.
Beyond the humanitarian imperative, which is an obligation for all the organizations that are serving other human beings in the valuation of neutrality, impartiality, among other values, these service actions, I believe that faith-based organizations are inspired in something more transcendental in the sense of faith that drives them. It is a natural place, love for the neighbor, and as a central motivation of these actions. There's a parable, the parable of the Good Samaritan, this occasion in which a person that is so different meets another person, and from the welcoming affection and valuing that other person as a human being, understood as a person, that person is helped. So that is precisely the example that Jesus wanted to show when we identify who our neighbor is, that our neighbor is also going to be that different person who is willing to serve. So in that sense, I believe that the motivation of faith-based communities has as a central axis its faith, belief, and the sense of love for the neighbor. Thank you very much. Any other comments? Was there a specific question for me? You asked in the case of Haiti, you mentioned that in the case of Haiti, I related it to what Catherine Marshall was saying earlier this morning, that in the case of Haiti, we need to move from intention into action. And you made a call to help Haiti, cooperate with Haiti. And as Dr. Pinheiro said earlier, the fragility, I believe. Yes, because one thing is a fragile democracy, and another thing is a democracy that has become non-existence, which is the case of Haiti. That is what Pastor Joseph Clemens was saying, that there's no rule of law, there's no democracy. So how can faith-based organizations in such a social context can effectively cooperate, and how can they cooperate, or in what areas? So not necessarily is going to go through a political transformation. It's probably going to be based on love for the neighbor. So how do you see specifically that help from other religious organizations? Currently, there's no indicator of democracy in Haiti at this time because we don't have an elected government. It's a de facto government. So it's been almost a year since the elected president was assassinated at his home. So there's no judicial system that can tell the the people of Haiti what happened exactly. So that comes from other countries, from the US, for example, and there's inhuman poverty. So this creates a very hostile terrain for what we can call a democratic process. If we organize elections, the majority of the people cannot decide based on certain criteria or to make a decision to votes for someone based on a certain platform or program. They are going to cast their vote based on hunger. So they make about 5 to 6, the equivalent of 5 to 6 American dollars, and that's terrible. There's a group of very powerful countries such as the US, Canada, France, Brazil, and the whole world through the representative of the General Secretary of United Nations in Haiti. They make up a group and they state that they are friends of Haiti. I believe that this group can do better because if poverty prevents democracy, then we need to fight against poverty. And so this would prepare a fertile terrain for democracy. And there's a group of national and international corrupt people who always steal money. The country needs more help, and we have to stop the corrupt. We need to put them in jail. We need to put the well-known corrupts, we need to put them in jail. So the groups that are interreligious groups that work to promote democracy and the dignity of life, their efforts are not enough. I am asking you to participate, to have incidence, influence, and I'm making this call to the interreligious leaders of the whole continent to ask the more powerful countries to help Haiti in a more efficient way. That was the idea.
Yes, I'm so sorry. Could you repeat the question? I didn't get that in English.
Oh, it would be about which is the distinctive issue, the distinctive characteristic of faith-based organizations from civil societies organizations in what they can do to collaborate in those kind of things, in those kind of issues as to stabilize democratic process or to be within society in a way that it's different from
Yes.
civil organizations in society.
Thank you. So I would say that faith leaders and faith organizations already enjoy a high level of trust among their communities, in which they can employ in order to establish and help establish a healthy amount of trust in public institutions among their community. They also have an intimate awareness of what the issues and the struggles that their communities are facing. So they are well positioned to play that role, to be able to know what are those barriers that people are facing when it comes to civic participation and having their voices heard. So they are already in that position and therefore can play a role in making sure that those barriers are removed and playing an advocacy role and working with elected officials and holding elected officials accountable.
One. Moderator, it's not a question but a comment. First, I would like to say the following. The title of this session is already indicated something that is a positive valuation of democracy by those who organize this and by the religious organizations. And this is not something insignificant because during the 20th century, especially in Latin America, we've had long experiences of non-democratic governments, lack of democracy, sometimes with the engagement of some religious groups close to dictatorships. And there is a learning in our countries in this sense. We have learned, the churches and religious communities have learned that democracy is a value that should be reached, attained, and preserved. It seems obvious, but it's not as obvious because experience shows otherwise. And it's shown that for a very long time. So we should highlight that. We've also learned that there's synergy between democracy and religious freedom. During lunch, we were talking with some other people and saying that there are places where democracy in our continent is fragile or is threatened or is non-existent, as one of the panelists was saying. And this also brings about lack of religious freedom. So it is important to reaffirm this commitment to democracy by the religious organizations. And finally, during these times of fragility or crisis of the political system, and here I can attest to the experiences in my own country, Argentina. In 2001, we had a serious institutional crisis, almost anarchy with the national government. that had to leave early, and we had to come up with a new government. And at that time, the religious organizations had a very essential role in that transition and to redirect democracy. That process was led by the Catholic Church, which is the majority church or religion, as it happens in many Latin American countries. And the Catholic Church was accompanied by other religions. And there was a process called the Argentinian Dialogue that had the participation of all the civilian society with led by the church and other religions. And I believe in that sense, the interreligious work adds credibility to the process. The Catholic Church could have um, made that call by itself, but in doing so, together with others, it added value and it gave it more credibility and more strength. And this is another learning that in times of crisis, sometimes the pacifying or mediating role of the religions or religious groups is more relevant, easier, and more successful if undertaken together by different religious groups. I agree. And I also remember a conversation that we had in the hallway where we were talking about the positive relationship that I was able to observe in Buenos Aires of what I don't know what's called direction of religious institutions. There is this mechanism for cooperation with the churches where somehow the relationship that I was able to observe was one of cooperation, or at least that is what was presented to us. And unlike other countries where religion is seen as a threat to government hegemony, where these instances are more of an ideological colonization for churches or faith-based organizations, or that work more as control mechanisms of control, where instead of considering what contributions we can achieve together, then it is seen as with suspicious. So why? Because if religions start solving social problems, then they become sort of a competitor for hegemonies, and democracies cannot work in that way. Democracies should work as an ally, or should be understood as an ally. And when we talk about the issue of a fragile democracy, but still a democracy, as opposed to a non-existent democracy, because in some places we observe the shell, the empty shell that looks like a democracy. There are elections, but they are not free elections or elections where the voter can choose, but they only participate in a process to validate hegemonies, and where the citizens somehow buy the idea or the notion not of capitalism or socialism, but opportunism uh, uh, to achieve or for survival. So poverty that grows becomes a fertile land for social problems, because sometimes people, just to survive, they have access to social mechanisms that impoverish them, not only financially, but morally. And so in this way, we get into a more difficult situation. This is an observation. So what is the role of religion in this sense? In strengthening citizens' dignity. If the citizen affirms his or her dignity in this case, and this can be translated to the responses of those people who live their life in a community of faith, and this expands, that would be a sign of home of hope for the growth of the nation and the democratic process.
My name is Alberto Mansur. I'm from Mexico. Thank you so much to the panelists. So we are observing a generalized trend, and that is that some or probably most of democracies seem to be committing suicide, so to speak. We can see how some actors are taking the tools of democracy, and they do that to get to the power, and afterwards they start eroding and they start weakening them, just as you were mentioning. Yes, exactly. We only see a shell of democracy, or we see not an actual democracy, or just as Rachel was mentioning some minutes ago, it becomes a less stable democracy, also like what is happening here. That's true. And the question here then would be, and this is a question for the three of you, what can we do from our different organizations, from our trenches? How can we help, if we're talking about humanitarian help, or if we have interreligious forums, what can we do so that we can try to stop these trends? Understanding, of course, that the poison or the fire that is eating the situation with democracies is the fear. And it seems like somebody arrived to their destination. Are you ready? Are we ready, Elias? I couldn't turn the volume down, I'm sorry. So as I was mentioning, how can we from our trenches, how can we fight against that fear? The fear to change and the fear to the other, because those two seem to be the ones that are behind the deterioration of our democracies. Thank you very much. Well, I think that fear is a reality that is present, and that is whenever, for example, we see cases of violence. I think that the response to fear would be rage. It's like we don't stop to have fear present, but in a way, as citizens, we start to dare to do some other things. And so in that sense, the word that can be helpful and inspiring and hopeful from religious leaders can be so powerful, that empowerment to the citizenship, so that they can act freely and they can understand that from their values of faith, we can see that there are some representations of the religious expressions that have been a representation before. For example, when we think about the everything that they do or did to try to fight for civil rights, and of course they become a movement, they become a reference, and that is inspiring for all. So that's motivating religious leadership that is also respecting autonomy and at the same time the sense of dignity. And it is because of that sense of dignity that we can face the realities of the social corruption that generates poverty. And because of the increase and because of that sense of solidarity, we start having communities that then start modeling a different behavior for the rest of the citizenship.
Yeah, I can go ahead and try to answer that question. I think it's a very important question that we talk about how fear is being used to gain votes, right? And the impact that can have on the social fabric and the way that that deteriorates our social fabric and really creates a situation where it's hard to have a vibrant social or public square, right? A vibrant civic society when people are not able to connect with one another or see across differences. So I think that the role that interreligious collaboration, as I said before, I think that interreligious encounters in and of themselves can create opportunities for people to get to know people who may have different religious or cultural backgrounds from themselves, and then have a basis of knowing that, okay, these things that I've been told about this group of people aren't true because I've met this person and they were, I got along with them and was able to connect with them. And then also, I think that we really have to address misinformation and hate speech. And I think that religious actors can have a role to play in this by denouncing misinformation, by helping their congregants and communities learn, how to have access to more reliable information. We see this with the pandemic, right? So there was a lot of rampant hate speech that began to spread over social media networks. And even when it came to the vaccine, there was all of this misinformation. But I think that religious leaders can point their communities back to the truth and away from, the misinformation that can cause fear of the other and ultimately these elements that break down our social cohesion and vibrant civil society.
Director of the Chile Office of Religious Affairs. I don't know if maybe you have a comment or a question. Both. Because your second question called my attention about identity or these idea of recognizing the identity in the public action of the faith-based communities. In a way, I believe that the question, or maybe the way in which we can give an answer, is still, well, it's not that it's still, but it seems like it traps us to think that that identity has to do with my perspective of the orthodoxia instead of the practical part of it. So, for example, when we talk about what is compassive, what is merciful, that condition of unconditional love, right? That is a value that is core in Buddhism, in Christianity, in Judaism, and pretty much in all religions on earth. So when we are talking about identity, aren't we talking about authenticity? That is how authentic it really is. How efficient and authentic really is my action. In Bogota, for example, there is a street that is called, I don't know if it still exists, but there is a street that is called the street of the disposables. And there are all of the kids that they refer to them as disposable because drugs haven't really let them another way out. And so what they do is they become hitmen, or they are becoming thieves. I don't know. I mean, that was a very long time ago, but nobody goes there. But there is a church of those that are disposable. In Chile, there is a phrase that is very interesting, and it was coined understanding, according to the new government, of having that dialogue of religions, and that is that the communities of faith go to the places where the state will not go. So I don't know, I am just asking, and I actually am asking this question to myself. Aren't we still lacking, or maybe we feel that there is an pathological speech of our identity, and maybe what we're really trying to say is that we are lacking, or maybe it was lost, or it wasn't really generated in a democratic part, those policies of recognizing and really knowing who the other person is, because it is an other that is different, but they are with me in the same field of solidarity and what can really be compassive. I mean, I don't know, this is a comment, maybe it is a question. I don't really know how to refer to it, but thank you so much for your contributions because it really made me think. Thank you. Thanks to you, Omar. And I would like to start by saying, of course, waiting for the response to from our panelists, that for me, this topic about what is distinctive from a faith-based organization versus one from the civil society is a very important question, so that we can really understand what is the specific contribution from religious organizations. And I think that your answer about them reaching places that the state will not go is precisely because of that. Because if we think, I don't know, when we're talking about the social registration, for the civil registration, for example, there are more religious communities that are very proud, actually, because they are throughout the entire territory, but we have more religious communities than these government offices. And I think that could be a value, but it is not exclusive just for faith-based organizations, but it is also shared by those organizations of the civil society. And at the same time, I wouldn't dare to say that only that distinction regarding who are in those faith-based organizations would love more. Maybe they have different motivation, but it's interesting that the organizations that have a specific belief actually go to people that maybe go to everyone. It's not just for their associates, so to speak, as usually it happens in religious communities. It is for everybody else. The civil society organizations as well, they do that. But I believe that if we keep working, and not because of this lack of coherence about maybe we have a right to exist, I don't think that that's where we're headed. But instead, if we know each other better, maybe we can serve better, and maybe we can better identify the places where we can be, or we want or need to be. And regarding what Juan mentioned just recently about how in the 80s, mainly in many countries and not just in Argentina, the religious entities with their coherence in their life were the ones that were called to be in charge of leading that democracy, and precisely because of the type of elections and everything. I don't know if maybe something like that would still happen in 2022 due to the erosion that the communities, the religious communities themselves have suffered. So in this dynamic of serving the society, in a way, I also perceived in Chile, yes, also due to crimes that were committed by those religious organizations and many other factors. But it is not very clear that today, whenever there is a lack of stability, then faith-based organizations or religious communities would be probably able to lead a peaceful process. I think that the last one that we saw was Colombia, but that they could be leading some other type of things with that fragility, I don't know. Maybe you see this differently in your countries. Maybe you have a different opinion. Yes, I would like to take back an example. I was just mentioning it before. It's very pragmatic. A government says, I am not going to be having a relationship with the political actors in the country that maybe have a parallel relationship. For example, if you ask Sairi, who is the president of a given country, she's probably going to give you two different options, right? So what happens? A government from another country, maybe they say, well, we have a corporation and somehow we want to be to have the solidarity with a given institution, but I don't trust in their political actors. Well, I can maybe trust the religious world, but I cannot really pick a specific church, because then that would be linking everything to something that is more confessional. And so there is where the different religious expressions can really have these common platforms with specific intentions. Because yes, maybe we can have an interreligious cooperation for dialogue. Maybe we can also have cooperation for interreligious forum for solidarity in any of its expressions, or even for advocacy. So it is part of what is going to be generating a good result and a good practice that we can find, that we can build paths together. And how is that going to be happening? Well, it will be inspired by intangibles, like, for example, love. Like, according to our religious principles, they will be able to find a visible expression in daily practice. Thank you.
I would like to mention that we all have a very powerful enemy that is called ignorance. Ignorance at the anthropologic level, religious or political level, does a lot of harm in the world. For example, at the religious level, human faith, for example, there's a Swiss specialist, Jean Piaget, that studies the development of intelligence in children and shows that there are different stages for intelligence to develop. There's another specialist, Lexon, that does the same work, and they are most well known in this type of research. There's also the work by Colbert, and also there is the development of faith. And there's this American James De Fowler that studies the development of human faith. At the faith development level, faith is an opportunity to build human life, and it doesn't take into consideration the small differences between people to build on differences. It respects the differences as an element of identity of people at the anthropologic level or cultural level, or as a physical anthropologic. It's not bad that if I have this color of skin or someone else has a different color, that's a difference, but that is not fundamental. That is true. When someone has a kidney failure problem, if you're looking for a kidney, you are not going to say that a kidney is from a black person or a white person. That's not important. It's the same. When we look for the fundamental at the political level, all the politicians are going to say, we can meet the population needs. What is the quality of life of the population we are serving? The same happens with faith. It doesn't matter what religion, Judaism, Christianism, ancestral religions. At the end of the day, according to the scientific work of James De Fowler, it's an ultimate concern because we don't have answers to that. What's important is what religion can do and with this ultimate concern to organize today's life so that we can live, because we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but today we have to live in this world, and we have to detect or identify the differences. We don't have to change the other. We don't have to work to tell the other, you have to convert, you have to change so that you are more like me, or the other way around. But we have to see what we can achieve together, respecting differences, and what can we do to improve life. That's what matters. One last question, because we have 10 minutes left. So we'll try to be brief in our answers. Thank you, Madam Moderator, and thank you to the panelists for their words today. I am going to make my question in English, but you can reply in Spanish.
My question is based on some of the things that our Haitian and American colleagues have mentioned, especially when it comes to the development of faith, but also in part what happens when that faith is mobilized in a way to actually be weaponized in the process of spreading things like misinformation and violence. My question particularly is, how do communities on the ground combat that weaponization of faith when it helps to make a democracy fragile? And I'm speaking in the context, particularly in the Americas, because we are still very Christian-centric in much of what we do. Our narratives, our systems, and our history are very Christian-centric. We have a lot of communities in the room that represent traditions that are not from the Americas, because many of the voices that need to be in here that are indigenous are not here to speak about this either. But at some point, we do have to acknowledge that the role in a place like the United States has a very large undertone that doesn't get discussed often. Starting from the 70s, when many folks used the topic of abortion to be able to weaponize this idea that religion can play a role in politics, and it'll play a powerful one. We now see it manifest into something like Christian nationalism, which now threatens the stability of a pluralistic democracy and allows us to sort of spiral out of control. How do we then play a role against that when oftentimes religious communities are the ones that play the neutral or the apathetic role in the process?
Thank you.
Yeah, I can go ahead and start. I think this is a really good question. I think that this really underlines the importance of always trying to bring as many faith traditions to the table when we are discussing any sort of political matter, right? I think that we can't just have one belief system when it comes to getting involved in sort of civic dialogue. I think that we need to have interreligious collaboration in order to ensure that we don't have this sort of fundamentalism that forms, as you're talking about, Tahil. I think it's really important that we have a diversity of opinions and create spaces for people to come together and to learn about different viewpoints so that they don't become so polarized. But it is difficult, right? It's difficult to make sure that we're being inclusive as possible at all times, but I think that it's incredibly important to make sure that we're always doing things interreligiously.
Yes, I would comment that Christianity itself is not the best way to facilitate diversity among the different religions. But Jesus, if you focus on Jesus, you can find the reference to facilitate to work with every people. Because in Jesus, you find different aspects with the Romans, with different group, political and religious group. And in the first century, when Jesus was on this land, my experience in interactions with other pastors, we realized that sometimes Christianity is more political than Christian. But Jesus, as humanitarian leader, we can focus our activities on Jesus, and it's easier to work interreligiously. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Quizás vamos al tiro a la última pregunta acá.
Hi, thank you all. Actually, leading on from Tahil's question, I guess when you have a topic like this, maybe it's worth but we don't have time for that, to dig deep into the terminology and talk about what is, democracy, and what is a fragile democracy, and what do we mean by stabilizing democracy and the role of interreligious actors. So again, whose definition of democracy we're talking about, and are we talking about instilling someone's democracy in another location and superimposing somebody's democracy elsewhere? So, and then the question then, okay, what's the role of religious actors and institutions in certain countries? And I'm sure we can think of a few examples. And I guess two key words that Rachel alluded to, and one specifically she mentioned. So one was around localization, having that local people deciding, and the second key word was around trust. And I guess the role of the religious institutions and leaders at a local level and national level, when it comes to supporting what some might term true democratic processes, because not all democracies are represented in a true sense, although they claim to be. But not going into the politics of it, but I guess some of the roles that Rachel mentioned, again, I'd like to repeat, and that is around advocating for fairness, justice, equality in the electoral process, and raising awareness amongst the community about the issues that affect the community at a local level, at a national level. And it's not really a question, but feel free to elaborate, but it's about, could that be something that the religious actors cooperate at a local and national level to lobby, and do they lobby for certain issues affecting the community at a democratic level? Because, for some communities, politics is a dirty word, and there's a lot of mistrust across the board. And so for some, it's not something they want to get involved in at a political level. And when they do, they may lose some trust in the community.
Would some of you want to react to that comment?
I can try to answer that, or comment on that. There in Virginia, where I'm from, there is an organization called Voice, and they get together once every month or so, and they bring, it's an interreligious effort, and they bring together like 5 or 10 people from each of the congregations, from each of the mosques, synagogues, temples, churches, and they invite elected officials to come to speak directly to them, to say, here are the issues that we are facing in our community. What are you going to do about it? And so I do think that there's opportunities for interreligious efforts to engage in political processes, in democracy. But again, as I said before, I think it's incredibly important that it is in an interreligious manner and that it is in an inclusive manner. And then with that, I think those are the spaces in which religious actors, and not just religious leaders, but people of faith can advocate and hold their elected officials accountable to make sure that those just and fair and equitable systems are in place for all. And when it comes down to it, as you said, I think a lot of religious communities will shy away from politics. But when it comes to democracy, when we define democracy as being a system that hears the voices of all, right? That makes sure that there's not one voice that is heard more or less than another. I think that there's a lot of values within our religious traditions that support that, as Catherine Marshall was talking about this morning, the preferential option, making sure that we are ensuring that the marginalized groups have a voice and that their needs are met. So I think that in that sense, there is a sort of natural role for religious actors to get involved politically when it comes to ensuring justice for all.
Thank you very much, Rachel. I don't know if Pastor Joseph or Pastor Piñero would like to end their presentations with a final comment.
To question about the relevance of the ideologies of the current ideologies or understand from their notion of faith how to contribute to the common space that is a social space that is beyond or outside our temples, or assuming a responsibility to the neighbor, is based on strengthening of democracy. The best place for communities of faith to thrive is as a place or a situation of religious freedom. I believe that faith-based communities, the churches, have a very serious and important responsibility in creating civic education, how from faith we generate or we create a proactive engagement, but that is also merciful because it is within the framework of our vocation. We are called to live our faith with humility, but courageously. And from that courage, we need to strengthen fragile democracies, especially those that we are seeing in Latin America that are increasingly threatened by the current governments. Thank you. I would like to say to please consider Haiti as a country with some characteristic aspects that make it very different from other countries in the region. We are in the Caribbean region. There is another country. We have the Dominican Republic with a Spanish speaking culture, Cuba, Jamaica. It's more leans more towards English. And we, as a French people, our neighbors are not a nation, but a department of France. That makes of Haiti an isolated, an almost isolated country, a country on its own. And it's the only country in history that does something to deliver a blow to slavery. And not everyone say or agree that this was right. United Nations recognizes slavery as a crime against humanity, but there was no decision to punish the criminals. So there is this will to continue slavery in a different way against women, against girls, against the poor, against the Black. And this dynamic continues. And Haiti, or sorry, the first country that said no to that is a country that is in many people's mindsets, and that this is negative for other countries. Helping Haiti, it's essential. It's an essential point to deliver a clear message and say that even if there are differences, it has the right to be part of this world. This is not easy. It's a challenge, but it's very important to say very clearly that Haiti, with all the opportunities it has, it's suffering this situation and it deserves a great big support to change, to revert this situation. Thank you. Thank you all very much for participating in this session, for your questions, for your interest. Let's give a hand to the panelists.
Gracias.